Hello, everyone. Welcome to the last day of April. So tomorrow's May 1st. So hope everybody has exciting plans this weekend. I think it's supposed to be nice outside. So hope you're able to get out and enjoy this weekend. So earlier this week, we mentioned from last week's DEI Talk about Denim Day. So I hope everybody was able to wear, a pair of jeans or a denim top or something earlier this week to celebrate Denim Day and kind of concluding National Sexual Assault Awareness Month. So yeah, and again, it's one of those like all of the months that we talk about. It's great that we have a month to celebrate, but we don't want to limit our knowledge and our information just to that one month. So it's something that we should be looking at year round. So. But that being said, I know I'm still technically recording in April, but tomorrow, May 1st, starts Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. So I want to kind of just do a brief introduction to that and kind of set the stage for this month. Again, Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month is set in the month of May for recognizing the contributions and influence of Asian Americans and Pacific Islander Americans to the history, culture, and achievements of the United States. So, and this celebration actually dates back to the 1970s. A former congressional staffer in the 1970s, her name was Janine Ju, first had the idea of designating a month to celebrate Asian Pacific Americans following the bicentennial celebrations of 1976. So in June of 1977, a bill was introduced in the House of Representatives to proclaim the first 10 days of May as Asian Pacific Heritage Week. And then a similar bill was introduced the next month in the Senate. And eventually it was expanded to include the whole month of May when President Jimmy Carter signed the resolution in 1978. And the reason that they chose May, for most of our things that we've looked at, there's a reason that certain months were selected. But for Asian and Pacific Islander Heritage Month, May was specifically chosen, and it was chosen for two reasons. One, on May 7th, 1843, the first Japanese immigrant arrived in the United States. And then more than 2 decades later, in May of 1869, the Golden Spike was driven into the first transcontinental railroad, which was completed primarily using Chinese labor. So again, those were kind of the two main reasons why May was specifically selected for this celebration. And again, it's really important that we celebrate, this month because, the history of North America is shaped by the stories of immigrants from Asia and the Pacific and the native people of the Pacific Islands. Some of the earliest Asian immigrants arrived from China and Japan, India, Korea. But immigration reforms tied to the U.S. civil rights legislation in the 1960s brought even more groups to the U.S., such as Vietnamese, Cambodian, Indonesian, and many other different peoples from South and Central Asia. So, Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders are a very diverse group, making up more than 50 ethnic groups and speaking more than 100 languages. Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders in the U.S. increased by 45% between 2000 and 2010, making them one of the absolute fastest growing minority groups in the country. So with the new census, come out from 2020, I'd be willing to bet that number was even larger. I mean, 45% increase between 2000 and 2010. So I'd be willing to bet from 2010 to 2020, when we get the results here very soon, we might even see even a bigger increase in Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders coming to the United States. And again, like all groups that we talk about, we always want to acknowledge, our history, and again, it's one of those, if we ignore history, the old saying goes, we're doomed to repeat it, but throughout American history, Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders have been both a highly desired but a deeply debased immigrant group, responsible for some of the great achievements in our country and targets of some of the nation's worst instincts, so to speak. They've been victims of both individual and institutional prejudice. And they have a long history in the U.S. of exclusion. For example, the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 was the only piece of immigration legislation to ever exclude a group based upon their nationality. And similarly, I'm sure a lot of you remember from World War II, the internment of Japanese Americans in 1942 represented the only time since the end of slavery that a portion of the population was imprisoned solely because of their ethnicity. And I've read a lot of legal scholars and scholars of the Supreme Court who said the 1942 decision Korematsu versus the U.S., which was the law that reached the Supreme Court that allowed the internment of Japanese Americans, has been called the worst the worst Supreme Court decision of the entire 1900s. So that's how serious, that law was. And thankfully they eventually overturned it. But, in the internment camps, the vast majority, there's about 117,000 people. The vast majority were actually American citizens. They were born in the U.S. They were full American citizens. And about 10% of that, they were children under the age of 10. So again, just horrible conditions. And again, luckily, we recognize, that was probably the wrong decision to make, and we tried our best to make up for it. But again, it just shows that Asian Americans and Pacific Islander Americans do have a history of discrimination and racism in this country. So it's really important for us to acknowledge our history and then move forward. And how do we look at it from a future standpoint. So, as we've done in previous months, I'll be setting up a couple of lunch and learns for this month and doing a few more things to celebrate this month. But again, welcome to May, Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Awareness Month. I think you'll really enjoy some things we're going to do this month. And as always, I hope everybody has a great weekend, and we'll talk next week.